and over to Matt.
Sorry, Ruth, no slides. So yeah, it's amazing for me to see that after 12 years at Pentaho, the architectures that we built into Kettle, the streaming, Pedro, the streaming Kettle transformation engine, and the jobs and everything are still holding up despite the fact that they're now being deployed in completely different environments. So instead of running locally on some machine, it's now, pretty dramatic, right? Running in these complex environments, Spark, Kafka, highly available load balancing across worker nodes, that sort of thing. So I created this small example. Where's my cursor? Just to mess with Pedro, right? So here is like this never-ending transformation that keeps generating rows. There's some examples at the bottom here. It's just some random data that comes out of this transformation. And what I did was create a small plugin that you can find on my GitHub account, github.com/mattcasters. And you can download this plugin, and it gives you a new streaming tab in the transformation settings, where you can define which step to take to populate a rolling window in memory on a cart server, for example, or on a data integration server. In this case, we keep 300 rows in memory, or you can also choose to say, okay, I keep an hour of data in memory. And what this gives you is a set of web services on cart. So here we have cart running. Let me just shut it down for a second and fire it up again. And what you can see is that it immediately starts up this transformation. My never-ending transformation is started. That's because it takes the information from the metadata from the metastore repository. It knows that it needs to start up because it's a streaming transformation. Anyway, so this transformation is now running, populating a cache. I really should get a wearable mic. No, it's okay. I'll wing it. So what you can then do is say, okay, I have a step that reads the whole cache data. For example, this one. Let's do a preview on it. And so you get some rows that are now in the cache populated. We also have some services to get the JSON variant of this. So you can call it, so you can use this to draw some D3 charts or whatever, some live graphics. That was the original idea, but one of the cool things that you can now do is create like a data service on top of this and just test this. By the way, for the people that are not using Bleeding 8.0 or 8.1, this is running on 6.1. So all this stuff that I'm showing you runs from 6. something to the latest versions normally. So you can execute SQL against this. So just do a select star from this stream and it works. Or I prepared some other queries for those that don't know about the select count star sum total value with some where clause, and then you can just test that. So that's the sort of technology that we created years ago. This SQL statement is being converted into a transformation that performs aggregations with a group I step, filters the where clause, and executes the stream transformation, which in turn comes then from the cache stored on the card server, which is automatically populated, which means that you can do live SQL against streaming data basically by keeping this in memory. The point that Pedro mentioned earlier was it's not as much that we don't support transactionality in transformations or that we don't support streaming, but we need like a whole body of work to wrap around all these streaming and transactional transformations to manage them basically, to take proper make proper work of signaling in the right appropriate time to handle errors properly and stuff like that. But it's interesting to see that no real change was needed to the core of the engines so far. The only big exception to core changes is the abstract execution layer, in which we'll see more and more work being done in 8.0 and 8.1 and later. I talked to the lead engineers that's doing AEL, and I think that's going to be a really cool body of work that will arrive in the near future, hopefully. They're just waiting to put this out in open source and into a fully supported API until everything is really solid, because we take pride in being API backward compatible and stuff like that. So it's really complicated to just take out all the execution engines from PDI and abstract those out. So that's what's going on. What's also going on in labs is that we spend a lot of work. Actually, my colleague Mark Hall is spending a lot of work building something called Pentaho Machine Intelligence, making machine intelligence for the masses more easily and readily available. Very exciting stuff. So we're constantly thinking in doing more things automatically. Let me just close this out, unless somebody has a question we can answer later. What I also did, I'll try to put this streaming plugin in the marketplace somewhere so you can play with it. There's some people that have not just billions of streaming of rows, but maybe just a couple of sensor data, maybe just some MQL, some MQTT from some Raspberry Pis that they're reading. This will work just fine. You can set it up in a couple of minutes. What we also released into the marketplace was the unit testing, the dataset plugin that we call it. The dataset plugin can be found in the marketplace. Dataset. Let me just try to find it. So this is the problem with the marketplace. It doesn't really show you the latest things that are added. I remember a few years ago, like 5 years ago, when there was only like a few items in here, but now it's like blowing up every month, right? It's a fantastic problem to have. Or maybe just a slow network. Here, data sets and unit tests for PDI. So this has arrived in the marketplace, and it's kind of like doing very well. People are using it all over the place. I was very happy to see Dominic show it yesterday during his, well, I saw the icon, this icon here. This lab thing. So the idea here is that you can click on it and create a new test case, what we call it, for any transformation that you're building, whether or not you're starting from scratch, or maybe you have a transformation like the one I'm showing you right now that needs to get some input data in order to use it, because it's like a mapping, it's a reusable transformation. It doesn't really have any input data to test with. So what we did is we can call this PCM17, and now we can say, okay, let me attach a test data set, or an input data set as we call it. And this input data set, you can see them here in the tools menu. Can you guys somewhat read this, because I can blow it up bigger, but let me just do it like this, because otherwise. So we have a simple data set with first names, last names, and a concatenated value. So this you can use to do test-driven development. So you start from this simple example and then build your transformation until you match this output. And the way that you test existing transformations, it's what we have here. You just connect a input data set to this step. You select which data set. You select the field mapping from the input data set to the columns in the step output. There we go. And you also select a sort order, because the data comes from a MySQL table or a Postgres table. And then this is how this looks with an arrow. And so if you want to say, okay, let me also test the output, the golden data set, and then you can do the exact same thing. First name, last name, and name as a mapping, and same order by ID. And so now if you execute this, it will actually give you preview data, and it will actually run things. So you can actually see that you have 4 input records, 4 output records, etc. What you can also do is say, I don't really need this step in my testing. So you can actually remove this step from the unit test. And then it's like a cross. It's been designed like a cross across the step. Or you can say, this calculator, I don't really care about this one. I'm going to bypass it, which means that at runtime it will be replaced by a dummy step, which gives you another icon like an arrow. And what you can also do is tweak it a little bit and say, okay, if I use any database lookups or table outputs or table inputs, I'm going to change the original data warehouse connection with a unit test data warehouse connection, so that it points to other reference data. And then you can also specify what type of work that you're doing, whether or not it's conceptual or developmental work, or it's a real unit test that you want to test every night during CI. So in this case, we want to test this because now the case is finished. Let's try to run this one more time. And suppose that you have like an error. Let's mess up the unit test, right? Just for so if you have like an error in here and you run this, it will actually show you like a pop-up dialog saying these are the values that have changed, and this is the step where it failed, and whatever, you know. So the dash doesn't correspond with the space in the value. Pretty much like you would see in maybe like tools like Eclipse or stuff like that. All right. Fix this. And then obviously the next thing to do is run this. Just open this. So run all the unit tests. We created like a new step to execute all the unit tests of a certain type, in this case type unit test. And so all the tests that are defined, you can actually run them and the output will be like whether or not the test has passed and whether, you know, which golden data set was validated correctly or not. And so you can schedule this simple transformation to run every night, put the data output somewhere in a table or in a text or an Excel file, and then you have your CI solution. The reason why we created this is because, I don't know, some 4 years ago I started trying to improve the work that people are doing with PDI to come up with best practices for development of PDI, but also for the deployment and governance of PDI. And so at Pentaho World this year I did like a whole session on best architectural practices for setting up whole PDI architectures. In which situation do you need worker nodes? In which situations do you need scale out? How do you scale out? What are all the implications? You know, how do you design whole architectures? So I'm hoping that in the next couple of months I can bring these presentations in some form to you guys, to the community. That would please me. We'll try to get that to work. So any questions on any of this? So I've traveled to Paris, Madrid, to Barcelona, to Curitiba in Brazil, and obviously Frankfurt in February. So I've been demoing this all over the place, and I've also demoed some of Hotasan's work, but you will see more of that later today. I will not speak about that. But obviously there's a lot of things brewing in the Kettle world. Kettle, the state of it is doing fantastically great. You know, we've been expanding in all directions. Lots of people inside of Hitachi Vantara are using PDI, and yeah, it looks like this is going in the right direction. The other things that we're looking at constantly in labs is obviously, besides machine learning and core PDI stuff, is also new emerging technologies like you know, blockchain. And so we're trying to figure out ways to integrate this with PDI, and this is very hard to do, but at least we're trying, right? Other things that I found very interesting are the things that Dan Keeley and others have been doing with micro containers like Lambda. Kubernetes is obviously what Jens mentioned is also fun. So we try to keep an eye on a lot of things, and then obviously we try to come up with new ideas. And in that respect, I have to look again back to 9 years ago, right? And so every great idea that we had in PDI, from you know, transactions in jobs, from doing the data services layer, from metadata injection, you know, parallelism in jobs, all these kind of things, they all were announced here at the Pentaho Community Meetup. So it's kind of cool, right? And this kind of gives our software the chance to grow and to mature, and to get feedback from you guys. So one of the, you know, feedback from the data testing, unit testing, was the need to create another type of data set where you can have lookup data with keys and values, so that you can more easily test unit testing transformations that have lookups to databases, to web services, to whatever, right? So this is all really good feedback that is invaluable, and these ideas are the most important things that we run with inside of PDI since the very beginning. And I hope that you know, this is like an invitation to keep those ideas coming, keep the feedback going. This is why I travel all over the world to meet up with you guys, is to get that feedback. So move over to GitHub and check these things out. And yeah, I would say thank you very much for your continued support, and yeah, see you guys next year, right?